Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 135, the A Cappella Rehearsal. Last week, I had a chance and an incredible honor to go to Colorado at Colorado Music Educators Convention in Colorado Springs. I was invited to be the headlining presenter there. Shout out to Tanner O'Hara, who listens to the show, and got some ideas that he wanted me to share with his colleagues there in Colorado. And so I filmed the sessions, as I always do when I present, and I, of course, have talked a lot on the show already about the way that I teach sight reading and my philosophies about literacy and about ways to really revolutionize the way that we think about literacy in our profession. So, of course, I also talked with Robin Hilger not too long ago on the show about the sessions that I proposed for the ACDA National Convention. One session in particular, which I called Literacy is Equity. That session was rejected on the grounds that if I wanted to talk about literacy, I should also talk about not literacy. And that was actually one of the responses from a reviewer, meaning to remind me that not all cultures read music. Well, of course, I know that, but the session I was proposing was about literacy and how to teach it, and why literacy is equity. Why it means that if a student has more options and has more tools in their toolbox when they are taught with a literacy-rich education in music. So, since I was not allowed to have that presentation and have that conversation at ACDA National, I did it instead at Colorado Music Educators Convention, and we had a blast. The colleagues there were just brimming with questions after both sessions, and also, since I had a little bit more flexibility in this presentation, I took what I was going to do for the ACDA convention and I expanded it into two sessions. This first one that you're going to hear today is called the A Cappella Rehearsal, and it is more of the how. So I laid out how we start from the beginning of the school year in 9th grade and we go all the way through the end of 9th grade into the advanced rehearsal, where I actually passed out a score of Reinberger's Abendlied and rehearsed it the way I would on the first day of school with my advanced kids, because they've all gone through those processes together. And so it was a blast. We had a lot of fun with that presentation. And then since I had time, I did another presentation, which you'll hear in a couple weeks, called Literacy is Equity, where I spent more of that time talking about the why we teach music literacy as such an important concept in our curriculums. I made the moral case that students who are disadvantaged need those options. They need every leg up they can get, which means that we need to teach them the tools. But I also made the neuroscience argument. The science of reading informed approaches to teaching music literacy. And so you're going to have to wait a couple weeks for that one. But this should get you started if you are new to this concept, and or if you are just hungering for trying an approach to music education that will make you less stressed about life. Because when your kids are as good of readers as you are sometimes, rehearsals can be pretty darn fun. So enjoy this. So in the next episode, you're going to hear the work of the Patreon and see the work of the Patreon supporters in action. The Patreon members who decide voluntarily to chip in anywhere from $3 to $20 a month for supporting the underlying cost of the show helped me pay for the camera equipment, the audio equipment, the things that I'm able to take with me to presentations to create live presentations that turn into episodes for you. The Patreon members also make sure that I can break even every month. The Patreon covers my costs. You are the MVPs that help me get new equipment and pay for the advertising and recurring costs and web hosting and all of the things that go into making a high-quality podcast. Very important group of supporters are the Inner Circle and the producers at Patreon. Those folks get a great shout out on the show, and they are Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, John Warner, Jonah Clixbull, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Don't forget to use your checkout code Choralosophy at all of the websites that make such an amazing partnership with this show. For sheet music, graphitepublishing.com is an incredible resource. If you're not checking there regularly, you're missing out. Also, head to ryanmain.com for sheet music as well. He's a self-published composer and does wonderful things. At both of those sites, you can get a discount by entering Choralosophy at checkout. And then, of course, there's sightreadingfactory.com. You can get your membership, all of your student memberships, and get a discount there as well. Plus, when you go to mymusicfolders.com for the best folders on the market, and mychoirrobes.com for really affordable choir robes, again, This show hooks you up with the discounts, so don't forget to throw that code in there and support those great businesses.
And welcome with me, Chris Muntz.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Let's first just establish my mic level. Can I be heard okay without hollering? Okay, excellent. So I'm excited you all came today, and I do want to start with a disclaimer. If from the title of the presentation, if you thought you were going to learn pentatonic stuff, that is not what this presentation is about. You have to read the description of the presentation. You can't just go by the first line. So I hate to disappoint anybody, but we're going to be talking about, in this presentation, a very systematic approach that I accidentally started doing about 11 years ago. Which is to rehearse in a choral classroom in grade 9 through 12 without ever playing the piano, which is what we do. Every single day, from the first day of school, pianos are not played, students are not given their pitches from an instrument or from me. So how does that happen and how does it work? So the evolution started for me out of necessity, because I grew up, like almost everyone in here, in a choir rehearsal where someone was sitting at the keyboard the whole time playing all of the notes. I grew up that way, I went to college that way, I went to grad school that way, and at no point had I ever experienced an a cappella choral rehearsal until I started singing in professional choirs. And I started to think, okay, so first of all, when I'm in this rehearsal, when I'm being paid to rehearse in a choir, I'm being expected to hear the music in my head. I've never been asked to do that before. Okay, and so I started thinking, well, there's got to be a way to do this. I was 25 years old. I was learning from scratch. Then, and I should probably say, I'm up here as a podcast host, but that's my side job. My main job is teaching high school 9 through 12. I teach in Kansas City, in a suburb called Lee Summit. We have 3 large high schools in Lee Summit, and our evolution of working towards an a cappella rehearsal has then spread into our whole district, and they all do it now because it works so well, okay? And so, but let me first tell you the origin story. I was rehearsing a choir of 9th and 10th graders about 12, 13 years ago or so at the same high school. I was the assistant then, and we had one accompanist that we had to share between 2 chamber choirs that were rehearsing at the same time. So the accompanist had to bounce back and forth, and oftentimes we would get a parent who would volunteer to play at the keyboard because the kids needed that in order to learn their notes. Well, at one point, when I was working with the 9th and 10th graders, one of the parents bailed out, and we couldn't find anyone else. And since I was working with the JV choir, the varsity choir got the keyboard player every Monday night. That left me sitting at the piano, and I suck at piano. I'm really, really bad at it. And I had become also reliant on being able to wave my hands while somebody sat at the keyboard and reinforced the pitches. 3 or 4 weeks went by, and I was about at my wit's end, ready to give up. The classroom management in that rehearsal was awful. My face is buried at the keyboard, trying to figure out what's going on the page, while they're just jacking around, touching butts, and all the things that teenagers do when they're not being watched, right? And so we just had this come to Jesus moment once where I was like, guys, we've been learning solfege in class and we've been using it as our warm-ups and all these things. We're just gonna have to start using that stuff to read the music because I can't play anymore. And at first it was very slow and it was very time-consuming and it was also very frustrating, but at least I was back out away from the piano making connections with my students, okay? By the end of that school year, those 9th and 10th graders in every musicianship category were more advanced than the 11th and 12th graders in one school year. So the next school year, I took over the program. My predecessor retired. And I took that learning experience and said, okay, we're ripping off the Band-Aid. Starting now, we are not going to play the piano anymore. So this presentation, I'm going to jump right in now, is essentially a quick walkthrough of what that looks like now after many years of me kind of tweaking this process and creating a real step-by-step program for the students. So here's what we imagine doing as the class is beginning of the school year. Now, I will oftentimes when I give a presentation about this, have to make the caveat that I teach 9th graders who do come from a feeder middle school where they know some stuff. They are not already reading a cappella, okay? But they do know what a quarter note is, and they know, they've seen a sight reading exercise, but they've not been asked to sing it independently. They've not been asked to read it a cappella, but I understand that not everyone gets kids with any prior knowledge at all. So what you would want to imagine is that you're taking the ideas that I'm going to give you today and think, okay, well, where are my kids starting? And start there, because ultimately that's all of our jobs, is we teach the kids that are in our classroom, not the ones we wish we had in our classroom. We have to get immediately to where they are. So I'm going to give you what we do, and then feel free to ask questions afterwards about tweaking ideas for you. So, of course, the science of reading, the neuroscience of reading, means that in order for them to look at a piece of music and know what it's supposed to sound like, they have to have already learned different musical patterns by that point. I like to call it an audio library of sound files stored in their brain, okay? So that they can look at the music and then know how to sing it. So that's our warm-up time at the beginning of every day. That's singing solfege exercises. You got your do, re, mi, re, do, all those things, right? And that time every day is what's instilling a memory of what those patterns sound like. And that's why it's important in your warm-ups that you are not just going straight up and down scales every day. You're doing all kinds of different patterns and arpeggios and all of those types of things, because you want that audio file to be large enough that they can access anything. Okay? So that's really important. So I want to make sure I don't leave that unsaid, that of course, yes, we are using rote teaching to build that library of sound files. As I said, introducing scales and arpeggios. And this is just my opinion. People would think about this differently possibly, but I sparingly start introducing music theory as we're going. I try not to overwhelm them. For example, my beginning kids at the end of first semester, as part of their final exam, they have to be able to name major key signatures. That's pretty much it. That's the only thing I ask them to learn in terms of music theory. Why? Because as you're about to see, they need to be able to look up at the screen and know where their pitch is. And if they don't know what key we're in, they can't know what pitch they're supposed to sing. So that's kind of the main thing. And then as they go, as I feel like they're ready for more music theory, I can point out, usually try to use the repertoire to like, oh, you notice that this doesn't sound major. Oh, we might be in a minor key. What does that look like? Right? And trying to have those conversations gradually. Now, we use the sight reading exercise. Now, we're going to take yourself to the first day of class in my classroom, and you're going to have to, for this presentation, pretend to be a pubescent, okay? Because I'm going to ask you to sing. And if you would, sing like your students, okay? We would like to have a lot of voice cracking. We would like to have a lot of breathiness, okay? Because if we don't, then my demonstration won't quite work, because you're already going to know how to do all this stuff. Okay? So what I do is when the kids start singing, and this is the very first day of school, we're not just teaching how to read the music. We're teaching how to sing the music. We'll talk about that more later. One thing that I introduce on the very first day of school, if any of you were at the rehearsal demonstration I did on Wednesday night, I do a scale of 1 to 10 for dynamics. Sing piano. What does that mean? To a kid who's never sung before? Well, it's soft. Compared to what? I don't know what that means. So what we do is we do a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is the softest you can sing without it being breathy. A 10 is as loud as you can sing without pushing, straining, yelling. Okay? And our rule in my class starting on day 1 is we sight read at a 6, so that the muscles are engaged and that they don't get to shy away when they're scared. That's a process, though. Okay, so on the first day of school, I will probably put up an exercise like this. Now, as Tanner said at the beginning, if you can move forward, I would. Those of you in the back, but we've got a nice full house here. And I would do, now keep in mind, after we've done a bunch of warm-ups and established scales and arpeggios and all of that. Can you all hear this pitch? Could you call it do and sing it? Oh, I love the 9th grade vowels. I love it. Yes. Yep. That's lovely. Now follow my hands. If you're hand sign people, you'll be able to read my hands. Sing what I show you. Okay, close. But of course, if you're an adolescent female, you probably got really breathy already. Or you were yelling. Okay, so I might have talked about that. I might have take that moment, even though this is a sight reading lesson. We're going to talk about why that next note started to feel strained, and we can introduce that concept. Okay, let's try it again. And then I take a breath. Excellent, because that happens in class too. And then I get to talk about what just happened. You guessed, which is what you will try to do when you read the music as well. Don't guess. Okay, follow my hands. Yes, except, are the ninth graders on the very first day of school going to get that right? No. So we need to learn how to sound out those skips. Okay, in my 2 o'clock session, we're going to be talking a lot about literacy in the brain. Okay, and so that's kind of a sequel to this. But the equivalent of do, mi, that's sounding out a word. Neurologically, that's the same thing. So we have to allow them to. So then I would usually say, in that case, because pretend like you all did it wrong, right? And I would say, which note did we disagree on? Because usually somebody will get it, but lots of people won't, and that's how I would respond. Which note did we disagree on? Because they'll always hear it. They're like, we didn't all sing the same mi. Okay, well, let's figure that out. So then I would go like this. And just start messing with them until they can have that neural pathway formed. Okay? And then the next step, after doing a little bit of that, would be that I would teach them the concept of audiation, which is that our job now is to look at this exercise and try to hear it in our head before we sing it. They've established what do sounds like, and then I would teach them what audiation means on the first day of school, which simply means to hear the song in their head, and oftentimes they will look at me confused. Okay? So at that point, I'll explain. Everybody close your eyes and try to hear someone singing Happy Birthday. It only takes a few seconds, and I'll ask, can you hear it? Yeah, of course. Everyone can hear music in their head. Everyone. Okay? And so that's audiation. That's all it is. So now our job is to take that pitch that we just heard and just practiced and hear in our head. So what we do is I make them stand up. You don't have to stand up because then you won't be able to see the screen. And we actually move our hands to the exercise. Let's try it. Ready and go. But audiation sounds like silence. It's very loud in your brain, silent here. Okay, again, ready and go. Okay, the other thing that will happen the first day of school is a whole bunch of kids' eyes will be like this. Okay, yes, we know, which is why I teach this on a screen, just exactly like we're doing right now, because I can then see where all of their eyes are, and I can even wave around, like, hey, over here, look here, right? Which is way faster than walking around to all their individual devices or sheet music and trying to get their eyes to go where it's supposed to go, okay? So for the sake of time, we're just going to do the first 4 measures. So then, now that we've audiated, I would simply say 1, 2, ready, and sing. That's lovely, except on the first day of school, they will go, okay? And then I will take them back to the concept of breath. We hear the pitch, we form a vowel, and sing at a 6. Go. To. And then I will tell them, every time we read it, it has to sound just like that. Ready, and go. Excellent, excellent. And that first exercise on the first day of school, including all of the rules and explanations, will take them about 20 minutes. And then class is about half over. Okay? So then the progress, though, starts to happen after that first day, because a lot of that is just expectation setting and process learning, what they're learning to do, step 1, step 2, step 3. During about week 2 to 5, and again, this is with freshmen, continuing to build solfege fluency in warm-ups is really important. I stick to familiar keys at the beginning of ninth grade. Everybody could have different approaches to that. I like C, F, G, and D, kind of rotating throughout. Audiation enforcement prior to reading. Now, week 2 to 5, we're starting to learn actual repertoire, right? And so what we're doing then is we're reinforcing the concept, which that's why you have a piece of music in your hands for a little bit later. We're starting to reinforce the concept of this audiation process happening when they open up their real music as well, introducing some of these same procedures when they open their score. So these things are all just kind of reinforced for the first 2 to 5 weeks of school. And then we can also start throwing in, as I said earlier, other theoretical concepts. Maybe the song we picked out is in a Dorian mode. Okay? Well, what I teach kids is we're solfege, and I do movable do bass minor also, because I want my kids to know where every single change of the scale is happening. And I want them to hear the tonality change and be aware of the tonality change so that they actually have to change the name of the note. Okay, that's a really big thing, and that's not the purpose of this presentation. We can argue about it later. Okay, and so I would start to introduce other things. So like we pull out a song, it's in a Dorian mode, and I would teach them, well, that's minor with law. And so we would change the way we name all of the pitches, and that allows them to access it pretty quickly. Working in minor modes, Dorian mode, minor mode, in their sight reading factory exercise, if you use sight reading factory, which I strongly recommend, and continue to enforce. And that scale of 1 to 10 concept will not stick on day 1. You will have to stop them over and over and over. And I usually, and this is a really important part of my process, and I really passionately advocate for the educator asking questions rather than telling them that they're wrong. Well, first of all, it makes me not have to be the bad guy. So I stop them, they start singing, "Oh, was that a 6? And they'll say, "No." "What was it?" And in my class, that's a 0.5 because it was breathy. So then we have to go back and reinforce the concept of a coordinated onset. What does it mean to engage your abdominal muscles right as you intend to sing? Step 1, hear the pitch in your head. Step 2, create a vowel. Step 3, breathe in through the vowel. And then step 4, which is the most important, is I have to decide to engage my abdominal muscles exactly at the moment that I want the singing to happen. That's how you create a non-breathy sound. And we'll talk about that more tomorrow morning in my vocal ped session. Okay, so this is, at the end of that probably first 6 weeks, you can see now that we're in 2-part harmony and we've got some other rhythms happening. Okay, so I'll reinforce our pitch, sing do. And by this point, they are getting pretty good at that onset. And notice the gestures that I'm giving you. It is not my job to make them have energy when they sing. It's not my job. It's their job to look at the music and know how it's supposed to sound. Okay? So that's also something that it takes a while at the beginning of the year to get kids ready for, right? Because they come out of elementary school and junior high choirs, and we love you, elementary school and junior high people. But oftentimes they're used to 1 and 2 and ready and go. And they're without that energy, they're like, and they want it to be fed to them, and so I won't. I just won't. I will just go like this and expect them to have gone through the process, right? So by week 5, week 6, we're through that. We're over that hump. And when I give the cue, the sound happens. Okay, try again, sing do. Now pretend we have already done our scale and arpeggio that we did before. Then I would ask them to find your starting pitch and sing it in 3, 2, 1. Yep. And then we would go through the exercise. Usually my rule of thumb by this point is this whole sight reading process takes about 5 or 6 minutes each day rather than the 20 minutes that we did at the beginning of the school year. Okay? And we would read it all the way through once. Things will be wrong, but I won't point out the things that are wrong. I will ask them. Alto group, where did you go wrong? Inevitably, at this age level, those dotted half notes, what will happen? They will get 2 beats or 1, right? But I'll ask, where did you disagree? Well, we only did 1 beat instead of 3. Okay, fix it. The second time we go through, we try to fix our mistakes. After that second time through, we can't keep practicing it, or else it wouldn't be sight reading anymore. And we just move on, right? So that's how that process works. And that's part of our daily warm-up every single day. Okay, now we're still freshmen, but we're getting to the end of the first semester of choir in my program. This is where we're starting to get real crazy with warm-ups, trying to build that solfege fluency. So we do things like, so I'm sure everybody knows the exercise I sang before, but do, re, mi, re, do. Good. Can we do a thing? Let's make it so that this side of the room, whenever we get to mi, we're going to remove mi and replace it with a snap. This side of the room is going to remove so and replace it with a clap. And we're going to go in a round. 1, 2, ready, and go. Do, re, do. Oh, let's agree on where do is. Again, and that will happen too. Again, and go. Do, re, do, re, do, re, do, re, do, re, do, fa, do, re, do, fa, do, re, do, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do, re, do, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, re, do, re, do, fa, sol, la, ti, fa, sol, fa, ti, re, do, re, do, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, ti, re, and then we usually cycle back all the way through. And so when I say get crazy, what I mean is that might be like the simplest thing we do, and then throughout the year, we add more weird stuff. Take out more notes, replace it with other weird motions, replace it with noises, and sometimes you can ask the kids, what do you want to replace it with? I want to slap my butt. Okay, but your own butt, right? And so, and whatever, they can kind of choose their own. That's tenor bass choir, by the way. It's always, that's the only choir. And so those are the types of things, and even like body movements. One of my favorites, and this is more, again, end of first semester, is quarter clockwise turns on certain pitches. So do things like do, re, do, re, do, re, fa, re, do, re, and cycling around, and then but then that, having a turn the other direction mixed in as well, and so they're just cycling. It's so hilarious because they never get it right. But but that's not the point. The point is to develop the fluency of how quickly they can look at a piece of music and pull up the next sound file. Because if they can do it while being hilarious, they can do it while being calm as well. Dictation. This is usually at the end of first semester where I start to introduce the concept of dictation, solfege improv games. It could be something like passing around 4-note patterns. Carol Krieger is a really big advocate of these types of activities where I might say we have do, re, mi, fa, and so to choose from, and you have to start with the note that the person passed it to you gave. So if I went do, sol, fa, you would have to start with fa and then make up another pattern, and we pass it back and forth around the room until everyone's gone. Well, once they know how to do that, if you get a class of 30, that can be a warm-up. That can be your solfege warm-up for the day, and then you move on into something else. And it's really fun. With the tenor bass, 9th graders, oftentimes that's also an opportunity to simply work on matching pitch. And it will take them longer than a couple minutes to get through that. The concept of reverse sight reading is one that I really think is important as well. It's a term that I made up. I don't know that it really makes any sense, but if we think about what sight reading is, I look at a piece of music and hear it, and then I sing it, right? So reverse sight reading is you hear the music, and you have to show me what you heard, okay? So everybody close your eyes. This is gonna be my do again. Show me do with your hands. Show me what you hear. Reverse sight reading. Okay, and with their eyes closed, they're not getting their answers from neighbors, and I can also see who's understanding and who's not understanding, and set up those other types of interventions with the kid whose hand is just kind of making floppy gang signs or whatever, right? Like they clearly are not understanding, and I can assign them for interventions or whatever it is that they need. Okay? So this is, again, all within the first semester. We're getting to stuff like this. By this point, pretty much any key is fair game in Sight Reading Factory. Still using scale of 1 to 10, still reinforcing that. By the end of first semester, my freshmen read music like this. And usually by the end of first semester, they're already bored with music like that. So oftentimes when I present this approach, the response that I get from educators is, I just don't have time to teach all this stuff. You don't have time not to. Okay? Because imagine if your 9th graders could read music of that level of complexity, what could they do by 11th grade? What could they be doing by 12th grade? By the way, process doesn't change. End of the first year, we throw wrenches at them. That is a metaphor, by the way. Although I do have a collection of soft items that I use in the classroom, and I do literally throw things at kids. But what I mean by this is that during the sight reading process, as I mentioned, by the end of first semester, if they're kind of getting bored already with level 4s, I will start to mess with how the exercise should go. So things like sing it in retrograde, 9th grade. Start at the end, last measure, sing backwards. They can do stuff like that. I'll do things like go up on the board, because again, I do it with a whiteboard. And so the music's projected on a whiteboard, and I might just write random accidentals through to just take the exercise and make it a little bit trickier. Have them take out words. So we did the snap instead of me and the clap instead of so or whatever. Sometimes I'll just say, that is still the rule when you sight read. Clap on your so's and snap on your me's. Just to change the process of, so that they, well, here's the real neurological aspect of it, so that they can't guess. They can't, because sometimes kids will become very good guessers. And my job at the point where they're becoming pretty advanced with their literacy is to always be out in front of them so that they have to be like fully engaged with what the music says. Yeah, go ahead.
So when you're saying they like snap on me, clap on do, like when you're sight reading, do you have like the altos snap on me and sopranos clap on so? They all snap on me and all.
I usually will have assigned each section a thing to do and a note to remove so that they all have to kind of do their own thing. So that's what throw wrenches at them means. Sight reading sectionals, what this oftentimes would look like would be the sopranos might be on the spot by themselves to sight read that day, and the other members of the choir might be giving the critique, the feedback, helping point out their mistakes, and or sometimes a sight reading sectional might look like everybody in the choir is going to sight read the exercise, but then within your own sections, I'm not going to be involved in that process at all by the end of 9th grade. You guys just go work out your problems. You've got 30 seconds, go. And then, okay, 30 seconds is up, let's do our second read and see if we can correct our errors. It's great for team building, and then of course great for, again, building that environment in the room where I'm not the one telling them that they're wrong all the time and I'm not the bad guy. Okay. Again, end of first year, advancing the concepts of vocal pedagogy is starting to happen. During the literacy work and then also during the repertoire. So this is where we're starting to really use that. The way I think of our sight reading 5 or 6 minutes at the beginning of every class is it's part of the vocal warm-up. It's not we do a here's how to sing and then we do a here's how to sight read. It's all happening at the same time. And I think that's really, really important. We can talk about more, by the time they get to the end of 9th grade, we can talk more about the vocal technique and the beauty of the tone and the dynamic contrast and all of those things when they are thinking less hard about what they're reading, okay? And I forgot to mention, one of the wrenches that I throw at them sometimes is that I ask them to sing the sight reading factory exercise with words. And no, sight reading factory does not generate words, but I'll just ask them, make up a word. I need a 1-syllable word. Tenor bass choir, poop. Right? Okay, another word, school appropriate word, and it'll be some other stupid word, and we just sing the whole solfege exercise, but without solfege, have them replace it with a word. Because what they're then transferring is how we hear the music in our head while then singing other stuff. right? Because we don't want that to go away when the repertoire comes out. We want that skill to be there all the time. Expectations of independence. Sometimes by the end of 9th grade, I'll have the choir go stand in mixed formations for sight reading. You're all off by yourself. I have a pretty big classroom, so sometimes I'll just go, hey, everybody go stand somewhere. 10 feet away is your minimum. Nobody can be within 10 feet, and it's not for COVID. It's so nobody can follow each other. Do stuff like that. So by the end of 9th grade, this is the type of stuff. We're usually at about level 5 on Sight Reading Factory by the end of 9th grade. If I have a really sharp class, sometimes they're doing the occasional level 6. But this level 5 by the end of 9th grade will oftentimes be a little bit boring for them. So again, I'm going up to the board and I'm doing things like I might circle. I did this actually just Tuesday before I flew down here. I circled this note, and then I circle this note, and then I circle, I don't know, this note, and then this note. Each section had a note circled, and I tell them the circled note is now your starting pitch. Okay, so then, let's say if I'm a soprano, and I got, woo! I didn't mean to break anything, Tanner. Don't fire me. Okay. That was my starting pitch. So then in this exercise, I'm a soprano, I start here, and then I count these 2 beats, and then I go back here, and end here. And of course, the music no longer sounds like music, but again, forcing them to be independent. And I can't even rely on where the altos are to figure out where the sopranos are. I just have to go, because we know we do that. Everybody relies on the altos. So, again, that was a year. That was a year in my class, approximately. All based on averages. But now we're going to kind of transition into the other tool that I use and that I really, really believe is crucial. We also test every single student individually on sight reading. At the end of each semester, they have to, as part of their final exam, take a sight reading exam. Okay? And the way it works is that we pre-test the kids, 9th grade, in about October. So they've had a chance to come in and become comfortable with us, and we've got relationships building, and they usually feel pretty safe by October, and we'll have them come in to the office, pull them out of the choir room, pull them into put some kind of music theory assignment on for the kids in the classroom. Depending on the size of the class, it'll take us 2 days, 3 days. Again, don't have time not to do it. It's invested time at the beginning of the year. And we just get an idea, like an elementary school reading specialist would, about what is the current reading level of this kid. And we make a spreadsheet with every kid's name. Here's what happened in that first attempt to sight read. Assign them to a level that is their goal for the end of first semester. And from that point on, every time they're reading, our expectation is simply that they are making progress through their levels. Okay? So it's this idea, I have a whole podcast series on this, but the way I grade, which is that every kid can get an A, but they won't all get an A, but they can, regardless of where they started the process, because everybody gets a customized goal based on what's appropriate for their reading level, which is standard practice in literacy instruction. Maybe we could learn some stuff from that. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple bullet points that I already said. Assess current reading level, set semester goal. We then assign the practice time on Sight Reading Factory. They have individual accounts. And then we also use it as makeup work. So I don't like to do busy work for makeup work. And so if they've missed class, they have the option of using Sight Reading Factory for a certain amount of minutes, because when they're logged in as their student account, I can see how long they practiced. I can see how many exercises they worked on, so that way they can't just pull up a tab and just leave the tab sitting there. Right? They have to, at the very least, cycle through several different episodes, several different exercises. Okay. And then, like I said before, we assess twice a year. Now, this is my favorite part of the way that we do this, because I think it's unique in the music education profession, which is we do not grade the sight reading on how perfect it was. We grade them on whether or not they could do it without our help. Okay? So if I've got a kid, maybe they're still at level 1 on Sight Reading Factory, which if you're familiar, who already uses Sight Reading Factory? Okay, great. Preaching to the choir. So you can all probably picture what a level 1 looks like. It's entirely quarter notes and half notes. It's entirely stepwise, and usually the range is about 5 notes. And for those of you who don't use it or maybe don't know, you can also determine in that pretest that a kid's not even ready for a level 1. Maybe their goal is just matching pitch by the end of first semester. We do that too. Okay? Or maybe their goal could be maybe a tenor bass kid maybe who's got a changing voice issue, and at least right now in October, he's only got a range of like 4 notes. Well, in Sight Reading Factory, I can just build an exercise for those 4 notes that he can sing. Okay? And so that's the type of stuff that we're doing. But then when we grade them, for example, if you're doing like an all-state choir audition, the sight reading assessment is 1, 2, ready, and sing. And you got to go all the way through. And if you stop, it's wrong. If you're late, it's wrong. You know, and we understand why they have to do that. If they graded the way I do, they'd be there for 3 or 4 days to assess all the all-state kids. Okay? But what we do is if it's wrong and you caught your mistake and you went back and fixed it, you're good. It's 50 out of 50. Okay? So what we consider a 50 out of 50 is the kid can read that music. They can do it all independently. They can solve their problems at their appropriate reading level. If I have to step in and help, that's when the grade starts coming down. Okay? So it works really, really well for 2 reasons. One, I think it's how we expect a rehearsal to go. We don't really expect kids to have sung everything correctly exactly the first time. So why assess that if that's not a skill we're using in our classroom? Right? What we expect or what we hope in a choir rehearsal is that we have kids who can solve their own problems. Wouldn't that be amazing? And in my concert choir, which is my most advanced curricular choir, that's what happens. We have 95 kids in there. I don't have time to deal with all their problems. Okay? And I don't have time to deal with their lack of musical understanding. That's your job. I'm going to stand up on the podium and expect music to happen. And if the notes are wrong, they've gone through this process now for 2 or 3 years because they're juniors and seniors, and they go through and they solve their problems. Okay? So by grading that way, we're assessing the skills that I want to see in the rehearsal. Encourage stopping, and I see your hand just 1 second. Let me get to the end of this slide. Choralosophy episode 69 actually has demonstrations of me grading freshman sight reading finals. I got their permission, don't worry, and I got their parents' permission, don't worry. Okay? But what they did was they let me film their actual final so that I could show how it works when I'm grading. I encourage you to check that out. Question, go ahead.
Yeah, so when you're grading based on independence, what's your methodology of lowering the grade once you have to step in? If your administration is trying to look at the kind of data you're presenting and the rubrics you're using, how do you do that grading based on independence?
So essentially, we grade, it's out of 50 points, and every time I have to help them, I just take off a point. So if you can imagine that, like, maybe on an 8-measure exercise, a kid needed me to help them find the distance between do to mi, once maybe, and then maybe I had to point out to them that their half note only lasted 1 beat rather than them catching it. Well, that'd be like another point taken off. But other than that, they were able to sing the exercise. Well, they still get a 47 out of 50. That's an A, right? And it's also showing that they're at A level literacy, but it's also showing that they still need some help. Your goal is 50 out of 50. And by the way, let's say that kid's still at a level 1. I don't usually move them on to level 2 until they're 50 out of 50. Okay? Which means they don't need my help anymore. So I'm not pushing kids along to get them to be able to move on. They need to move at the pace that their brain and is able to push them, right? I hope that answered your question. I will say the other part of your question was how do the administrators react to that? This is kind of glib maybe, but it's so rare that music teachers present data like this to administrators that they just love that I'm doing it. They just love that we're assessing kids individually in a choir class, and it feels to them like a class in the same way that math class is. Yeah, good. All right, so I'm gonna rush ahead to the rehearsal now, and then I'm gonna try to save time for questions as well. Everything we just did continues into the repertoire. When they open the piece of music every single day, the process is the same. So if you can see a copy of Reinberger's Abendlied, share it with somebody. Now this is why I chose this piece for today. Anybody sung this piece already in their life? Of course, it's a classic piece of the choral repertoire. However, I chose this piece because in year 3 of me doing this was the piece of music that I put in front of my advanced kids on the first day of school. The first day of school. And I walked to the piano on that first day of school. Abby Guest is one of my former students. Were you in that choir? Alexis, were you in that choir? Okay, so somewhere in between those years. Sing do. Now, of course, they knew already on the first day of school which part they were assigned to. You guys just get to pick a part. So I played the pitch that one time. Y'all still have it in your head? Okay. Find your starting pitch, no matter where it happens in the song. Ready? And sing. Okay. Audiate from the beginning. 1, 2, ready, and go. Audiating is silent. Amen. Measure 3. Okay, we stop right there. Let's try that much. 1, 2, beginning, and sing. Yep, and we stop right there. Repeat the process, go to the next few bars, find a good place to start, back and forth, find mistakes, just like we do in Sight Reading Factory. Soprano twos, any places you disagreed, we talk about that, okay? So again, this was year 3 of me doing this process, so the juniors, at least in that group, had been raised since the beginning of 9th grade doing this every day, and we rehearsed for 45 minutes. I never had to go back to the keyboard. The entire rehearsal. Okay? I will tell you that my brain was not ready for it either, but here's the beauty of this system. They were, and if ever I lost track of where a pitch was, somebody in the room knew it. Okay? And so then the process would, in fact, I would like to try this as an experiment before I start taking questions. Could we go to measure 3 and with chaos theory as our guide, I would like a few people to intentionally sing a wrong note. Ready? And go. Yep. And so if that happened in the first rehearsal, and I will be clear, on that first day of school, there were mistakes all over the place. It was not perfect. But then chaos happened. In that first year of doing this, I probably would have lost track of where some of the pitches were as well. And so then always the step back moment is, okay, that was wrong. Everybody sing do. Now find your actual starting pitch. Take 3 seconds. Ready, and sing. There we go. And now we can keep going. Okay? And that was the process. And at the end of that rehearsal, I was spent emotionally because of how much art happened on the first day of school. And the best part of it was at the end of that rehearsal, I went to the kids and I went, do you have any idea what you just did? Kids your age aren't supposed to be able to do that. They're not supposed to be able to do that. And they just went, what? Because it was the water they'd been swimming in since the beginning of school. Why shouldn't they be able to just go to the advanced class and do more advanced repertoire and do the next thing? In fact, one of them raised their hand and said, well, my part at the beginning is like a level 4 sight reading factory. I was like, yeah, fair. And so that's what we do. My advanced choir at the high school, they can sing anything, any repertoire. Because we have now so much time in the rehearsal that we can talk about other stuff, like how to sing beautifully, how to interpret poetry. We can take a day off sometimes and just talk about our feelings. Because I know that it's going to take 4 days to learn the music anyway, so why not just have all the things we talk about valuing as choral directors, what if we had that much time to actually do those things? Build community, build connections, which is the theme of your conference. So that's the process. I'm hoping that most of you will come back at 2 o'clock, because in that session, I'm going to be talking about why we do this and how it works neurologically. So it's kind of a sequel session as well. And so I'm excited to have been able to share that with you, because I love my job. And part of it is because we just get to do music all day long. And it's so awesome. So thanks everybody. Thanks. And I think I saved time for some questions. I have like 2 or 3 minutes for questions. Go.
Okay, so we are all going into our, being new teachers, but also when you are already a teacher existing in a school, how do you go about implementing this without students getting frustrated that we're, taking a step back?
So the question was, how do we implement this stuff without students getting frustrated? The answer is you don't. In fact, I address that with the kids in the class. If you're not confused, you're not learning. And so let's really just buy into that feeling, and let's be aware of that feeling, but let's also know that when you're feeling that, that's your brain building new connections. You're confused, it's frustrating, it's hard. This is a class. Go again. Question, go.
How do we handle differentiation for the kids who are at a level one who get in their settings and everybody else I don't have
Okay, so the question there is, how do you differentiate when you do have the kid whose individual reading level is a 1, but the class is at a 4 or 5? Well, keep in mind, reading by yourself is completely different than reading in a group, which is why I do both, because they're going to move along at different paces. Somebody who's reading at a level 1 by themselves could very well just be fine singing because of confidence, their psychology, their vocal technique, whatever else it is that's causing them to be behind the other kids when they're by themselves. In my experience, they're usually fine. Because they're also, we tier our program too, so we have a beginning level choir class. I probably should have mentioned that. Beginning level choir class, intermediate level choir class, advanced level choir class. So I'm not dropping kids in the advanced class that have never done this before, because they would be swimming and not successful. Go ahead. Yes. Yes. Yep. Go ahead.
Do you use that as a reporting function where it's assignments that the manufacturer to benchmark them, or are you only moving them to a different level and carrying them half semester?
So I would not move them along to another level without in-person assessment. And the reason for that is that I want to see, I don't want to just hear the exercise they finally decided to submit after recording it, because that's going to be their best one or whatever. I want to hear their process. I want to see where their eyeballs dart around. I want to hear how they're breathing. I want to hear how they're negotiating their register changes, because a lot of wrong notes from kids when they're reading music is just, I didn't know how to find my head voice. And then the teacher assesses, well, this kid has pitch problems. No, they don't. They have registration problems. And then that allows me to find an exercise that works for them. Very difficult to do that aspect of it when it's, just the final submission that they recorded and sent in. Yeah. Good. Go ahead. Yes, good question. She asked if we let the kids write in solfege. So one of the differentiations that we do for kids with individual assessment is that some kids, when I'm setting their goal for them in October, I make a little note on them, they need solfege written in. Fine, start them somewhere. Then the goal maybe next semester is we take it away, see what happens, right? But then in class, we never write the solfege on the screen. Ever, ever, ever. Not even from the first day of school. When they get repertoire, the repertoire is oftentimes a little bit trickier than what's happening up on the screen, in which case we adjust and take some sections to write it in. But I do have some processes for how they write in. I try to encourage them to not write every single piece of solfege in. Go find the tricky things, write in that. So again, trying to train them away from needing it at all. Yeah. Any other questions? Go ahead.
In the first year of doing this, do you have to assign really simple, easy repertoire? And does that also...
So the question is, do you have to assign really easy repertoire the first time you do this? And the answer is yes. Most choral directors overprogram. They're teaching the class that they wish they had rather than the one that they have. And so my encouragement is that the kids will have more fun long term if they knew by the end of the process that they did all of that. That was not the teacher doing it. I did that. And so I don't care if the song is really easy. They will be enriched from knowing that I was not spoon-fed that material. They hear the concert recording at the end. I did that. That's huge. That's huge. That's what keeps them coming back. It's not that we sound good. It's that they feel powerful. I don't need you, and that's always my goal. I am not a high priest of choir. You do not need to come through me to get to the Father. Okay? My goal is to get to 12th grade, and the kids don't need me at all. In fact, that happened this school year. I had an issue where I needed to be two places at once while my advanced chamber choir was giving a performance. I couldn't be at the performance, you guys. And they said, Mr. Muntz, you get in the way in some of those songs anyway. I was so proud. I was like, yeah, you're probably right. I'm just getting in your way. You guys take care of this. So they took care of introducing the songs. They took care of setting their own tempos in the performance, and they just did it. I rushed and did the thing I needed to do and came back for the next one. And I said, how'd it go? It's great. No problems. Right? It's independence. That ought to be the goal. And I think I'm getting kicked out of here, but please find me after. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of an episode. I hope you found that presentation enjoyable and interesting. If you've been a long-term listener of this show, you've heard some of those ideas before, but I put them in a different context and I put them in a different sequence that hopefully you will find helpful. If you're new to the show, this is a good place to start. Head back to episode 18 if you haven't heard it yet. That's ripping off the Band-Aid. And then there's episode 52, episode 69, and episode 90. Those are always the ones I give as references for people who want more help with literacy instruction. Thank you so much, and I hope you found this helpful, and you'll get to hear the other part, the why part of that presentation coming up soon on the show. Stick around.